I don't say a word until he tells me I can. Greetings, welcome to the 6th session of the 2nd season of Stories to Share. My name is Joe Steinfeld and I am the moderator of this series. And today's speaker is a most interesting person, as I think most of you know. She is a New Englander by birth, grew up in the Boston area. She went to college at UMass. Long time later, she got a degree in religious studies at the University of Hartford. She is now a longtime resident of Jaffrey. Those of you who may be here for the first time should know that this series features people who are from this region. And somebody asked me, well, aren't you concerned you're going to run out of people? And I said, not a bit, no problem. Well, our speaker is more than a local person, more than a New Englander, but really a woman of the world. She graduated from college and then spent 29 years in the military.
26. Only 26.
That is the first of many mistakes I will make today. Then she became an interfaith minister, a counselor, and this part you didn't tell me, somebody else did, a wicked tennis player. Well, her parents were born in Poland. One in a largish city, one in a small town. And what she has done, as you can see from the title of today's talk, is gone full circle. And I suspect you all know that her mission, or one of her missions now, has to do with Ukrainian refugees coming into Poland, where she has been several times and where she will be going within the next few weeks once again. And if you ask her, well, what are you going to do when you get there? You get a wonderful answer. Well, I'll look around. I'll see what needs to be done. I think actually she has more in mind than that, but she is, among other things, a modest person. And we're lucky that she's one of us. So, Ilona Kvichin, yes, I've been practicing, I want to get it right. Ilona Kvichin, welcome to Stories to Share. You certainly have stories to share. I'm happy to introduce you.
I am a little overwhelmed. Thank you very much for those kind words, and thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I must say, when I first started thinking about this, I said, how am I going to talk for about an hour? I don't know. I mean, I've given sermons, I've given speeches. You don't want to go more than 20 minutes on those because people will start leaving. But anyway, at this point, I hope I don't overextend by too much and I don't get the big hook yanking me out of here. But again, thank you very much for this opportunity. So, full circle. From refugee to refugee support. And there are a few other smaller circles that I'm going to kind of briefly mention in between. It occurred to me that by my going to Poland after Ukraine was invaded, I had come full circle. My parents, and by the way, my brother and sister-in-law in the audience, George and Sandy here. So my parents, our parents, were refugees from Poland following World War II and came to the United States via Germany with little old me. I think maybe I was about this high. And here I was going back to their home country 71 years later to help refugees there. It's really a sad statement that this needed to be done. So I hope to share the stories of this circle today, my parents' refugee experience, my time in the Army and how that is part of this circle, some lessons learned from my time as chaplain after retiring from the Army, and what I saw and did during my 3 trips to Poland last year. As you may pick up along the way, not all of it came about as planned. I think I'm pressing the right one. It was
Big button.
big button, yeah. Got it? It was working before.
It worked fine in rehearsal.
Oh, whoops.
That's me.
Okay. Okay, can I go forward? Okay. So this is just a symbol of Polish-Ukrainian friendship. It's a slide that appeared at a concert I was privileged to go to my last day in Lublin, this last time I went. Many Poles opened their hearts when the refugee influx came in, and I was very touched by everything I saw. Many small people in many small places doing many small things can change the face of the earth. This is a saying I love. It was graffiti on the Berlin Wall, so I was told. And this is a lot of what I witnessed in Poland. People were doing all kinds of things to be able to help, from driving people to bringing food to clothing, you name it. And there were so many people of goodwill. There are many examples of people of goodwill throughout the world. And here in Jaffrey, I don't think you're going to run out of people, Joe, anytime soon here in Jaffrey, or for that matter, in the Monadnock region. And I know for a fact there are other people doing things for Ukraine here. I'm just one of many small people doing what I can based on my particular skills, the languages I have, my experiences, knowledge of the countries, and some of my connections. So here we go with the story. That's my parents on the left, their wedding day, 1949, and them 50 years later on their wedding, 50th anniversary of their wedding. Now, mom and dad, as Joe said, came from different parts of Poland, city girl, country boy. They probably would never have met in Poland, but they both became refugees in Germany and met at a displaced person camp. They got to Germany via different methods, well, different ways. My dad was taken in 1943, I think he was 17 years old then, for forced labor in Germany. He didn't get to say goodbye to his family, and ended up working in Munich for a fellow who had a farm and a coal business. My mom and her sister, Amanda, towards the end of the war, rode their bikes ahead of the Soviet forces to get into the American sector because of what the Soviet forces were prone to do to women. So that's a little bit of their story. Now, this is a copy of my mom's refugee registration. When my brother and I were going through my parents' house before we sold it, they ended up retiring in Florida. We came across a whole bunch of documents we didn't know existed. And my parents didn't really talk all that much about their experiences, just a little bit. So this has basic information about my mom. You gotta love that hairdo. We were trying to figure out if that was a hat, but I'm not sure. This is a Nazi document, as you can tell. It was what my dad was issued when he was forced to work for this guy. It's the Arbeitsbuch für Ausländer, workbook for foreigners. You can see he doesn't look like a very happy young man here. There are only 2 entries in this book. One entry was when he started working for the fellow that he was assigned to, and the other is when the American forces liberated Munich in 1945, so a couple years later. Those are the only 2 entries in this book. This is some of the work history. They ended up in Bremen at Camp Gron. On the right is sort of a work record of my dad. He was a security guard, ended up being a chief guard. He was an interpreter and inspector. It kind of synopsizes that. To the left is a German document that my mom was issued depicting, what she made, some tax information. And we found this Allied Expeditionary Force index card. We're not sure exactly what that was issued for, but that was also in her name. Now, this is one of those little circles that I mentioned. My dad was a security guard. I ended up as a military police officer to begin with in the Army. More on that later. This is a picture of my dad, and this is him leading, carrying the flag. Leading was either probably going to raise the flag or having lowered the flag. He was very proud of that picture. This is my dad and his buddies chilling. He looks much happier here. The young man in the middle, kind of sitting down, sort of squatting, they kept in touch with him and his wife. I think they moved to Connecticut. So that's them at Camp Groen. Now, they knew they didn't want to stay in Germany, so they started applying to move, to emigrate. The story goes, my dad wanted to go to Australia. My mom wanted to come here. My mom prevailed, as she often did. I could have been standing here talking to you with an Aussie accent, but I'm not. Lots of documents along the way to emigrate. These are just 2 good conduct statements for my dad. 2 different bosses. The one on the right was a colonel, and a little bit more about him in a few minutes. This is a letter of acceptance dated June 1950 that they had been cleared to come to the United States. There were a whole bunch of other documents along the way, some in Polish, some in English, but this was the letter of acceptance, June 1950. However, I came around in August of 1950, and I was told I kind of gummed up the works because they had to start all over with my paperwork. I don't know if they were looking for good conduct statements or not at that point, but it wasn't until October of 1951 that we all actually came to the United States. And back in that time, you had to have a sponsor, you had to have a guarantee of housing and a job. Before they left, this is the colonel that I mentioned. They called him Uncle Piotruś, Uncle Peter. And he wrote, my dad worked for him, and he wrote these words. I don't think you can read it, so I'd like to read you these words that he wrote. With this photo, I would like to thank you for all your loyalty, and I'm going to take a deep breath, for all your loyalty, friendship, and valuable service you have done for me. May you in your new country find freedom and many new good friends. I wish for you and Krisha and your child all the best of good luck, good health, and a very happy and successful future. Goodbye for now. Someday we may meet again. So until then, do your best for your new country as you did for me. Yours truly, Uncle Piotruś. And they did meet. He retired in New Jersey, and my parents were able to visit him a few times. They kept in touch. So this is, as I view it, kind of another smaller circle. He helped my parents a lot, to include making sure they had a honeymoon and many other things. So he was a colonel in the Army. Here I am a retired colonel going back to their home country to help other refugees. It's kind of mind-boggling, actually. So here we are on our way. This is the USS Hersey. It was a destroyer, I believe, converted to carrying refugees back to the United States. That's the manifest. Our names are on there. I don't know if you can find them, but they are, to include me. And they, I'm told that my dad was sick the entire trip. Mom had a little cabin because I was around, so she was entitled to a cabin, so I made up for the sort of mucking up things a little bit earlier. So we ended up via New York and South Boston. Ultimately, we moved to Melrose. I'd like to show you a few documents of what they kept in their process for citizenship. As you can read on the right, the questions and answers. On the left are the words to the Star-Spangled Banner and God Bless America. They kept it all these years. Obviously, it meant a lot to them. They loved Poland and they loved their adopted country. So a couple stories about English. They had to learn English. The saying on the top comes from a list that we found of tongue twisters. I have trouble with this one myself. The sea ceaseth and it sufficeth us. I don't know if they got that completely or not, but we had a whole list of these. I chose to show you this one. Another story, when they first arrived, there was a little grocery store where they lived, and my mom saw the sign P-I-E-S. We know that means pies. In Polish, it means dog. So seeing this sign, she was a little befuddled about why the heck they would be selling dogs in a food store. And one of those small people, a woman who helped our family a lot, took her back to that store and said, "Look, this is what this is. It's not a dog." So, and many refugees have these kinds of stories. It's a learning experience, and you need people to help you through it. So they worked hard. This mom started off as a cleaning lady at the old Hancock building in Boston, worked her way up to file clerk and then an adjuster for insurance. This is her learning, I guess, about auto mechanics. Look at the clean white coats. I don't think they went under the cars on that. My dad went back to school, Northeastern University, got a degree in engineering and became an electrical engineer working for a number of firms. So they started with nothing and were very, very grateful for all and appreciated the help that they received. Like I said, it's typical of refugees, and they gave back in turn once they got on their feet. They also played hard. This is a group of their friends. George and I kind of dubbed them at some point the Polish Mafia. I don't know why. But all of these people were, well, pretty much, I'm pretty sure almost everyone here was a refugee with their own story from World War II. They loved life, they lived it to the fullest, they took every opportunity to have a good time in between things that they had to do, and that's a lesson, I think, for us all, is to appreciate life to the fullest as we can. Poland kept calling. They couldn't go back to Poland, it was communist, until they got citizenship, which took until I was in the 3rd grade, and I got my citizenship from my parents once they got theirs. I still remember that day. I went before this kindly old, and I use the term loosely now, he might have been in his 50s, I'm not sure. I laugh at that now, but he was a very kindly man. He threw me a few softball questions like who was the first president, and then took me aside and talked to me a language I could understand about what this meant, what I was doing today, what citizenship meant. It's obviously it resonates in my heart still today. So once we all got our, and then my brother was a citizen. He was a citizen here because he was born in Boston, which whenever we played war was a point of contention between us. In any case, they had to save up, and off we went to Poland for a whole summer in 1959. They left $100 with their landlord. It took courage. Had no guarantee about a job coming back, but they had to go back to see family and friends that they hadn't seen. And at this point, I'd like to read you, I could go on and on about the stories from that summer, but there is one moment that has resonated in my heart forever. I can't let go of it. It's when we went to visit my grandmother, my dad's dad. And I tried to capture this moment for a while, and finally about 8 years ago, this poem came to me. My dad doesn't show much emotion, but we arrived in Poland, were taken to one uncle's who lived in a fairly large city. My grandmother lived way out in the country. We boarded a wagon and 2 horses, Maciej and Dudek, I still remember their names, and off we went to my grandmother's into the country. We rounded a corner, And my dad jumped off the moving wagon, ran to a gaggle of people we had seen up ahead. And the next thing you see is someone being twirled in the air. And this is my poem, if I can get through it. I do need a drink of something. It's not vodka. It's called The Whirl. Skirt billowing, a petite woman picked up and spun after 16 years of separation from her oldest son. Lives disrupted by a war, ach, the havoc they've done. The sun outraced 2 horses those last 50 yards, joy and sorrow dancing together in everyone's hearts. The embrace, then the lift, the spin, the twirl. Were words spoken? Ah, no, it was all in that whirl. What of the war's impact, all those lost years, the tragedies, the bombs, the ever-present fears? Oh, they no doubt lingered, and yes, there were tears. But came the embrace, the lift, the spin, the twirl. In that moment, all put away, gone in that whirl. A wife and 2 young children caught up from behind, absorbed into a loving, chaotic circle, one of a kind. A family reunited, a full summer still in store. The farm, the cherries, cows, chickens, and so much more. So many memories in the making for a young boy and girl, all captured first and foremost in that unforgettable whirl. Since then, the wars continue, both big and small. Would that a wondrous whirl could put an end to them all. And that is, I'm sure we all carry in our hearts. So then I joined the Army. I wanted the Navy, actually, when my roommate and I started investigating, but the Navy wasn't allowing women on ships, so I said, what's the point? So my roommate and I both joined the Army. Now, at the time, there weren't many PATs available for women to become officers. We ended up attending an 18-week Women's Officer Basic course. There was no ROTC, there was no West Point, none of that was available. And ROTC did not invite the 2 of us to take the oath of office along with the ROTC cadets then. So after the graduation festivities, we came home, and this is Mr. Wright. He was a retired lieutenant colonel. I asked him to give me my oath of office, and he did. So just a couple, I couldn't resist, just a couple of pictures from basic training. We fondly called it WOPSI. This is sort of my gang that I hung around with in our fatigues, and then that's on graduation day with a couple of friends. From there, I became an MP. Now, that was not according to plan. I mentioned not much of this was according to plan. As I was with the first group of women who were detailed to other branches, which means like engineers, signal, not just in the Women's Army Corps. We were given some choices, and I wanted to be intelligence because I thought, well, with my language skills, that would be a good mix, good fit. And I was fat, dumb, and happy for a while until about a week before we graduated, when my platoon leader called me in and said, military intelligence isn't going to take you. You have relatives in Poland. The security clearance is going to take way too long. So what else do you want? And I said, can I think about it? And she said, no. I need an answer now. So I had a friend who was going into the MP. She was all excited. I said, how about MPs? And the rest is history, as they say. So these are just 2 photos from that time. I was company commander in the upper picture. I think the young man, the specialist, re-enlisted. I was congratulating him. On the bottom there, I was platoon leader in Germany. I was the liaison officer to the German military police Feldjäger battalion. We were at some joint exercise, and I'm handing him a gift from our company. So then, every officer has to get a second specialty roughly midway between, and it's another many stories here, but I finally became a foreign area officer specializing in the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. There I had a series of assignments. Technically, you're supposed to go back and forth to your original branch. I knew I didn't want to do that. That lowered my promotion chances. I didn't care. I really loved my foreign area officer work. I first got a job working with debriefers in Munich. We debriefed people who came into the West from Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact, and a few other countries. It was a great job. Lots of emigres, also from after World War II, who loved their country. I was the operations officer, and we actually came under the operational control of the CIA. I can tell you that now. I couldn't before without shooting you. So then I went to the Pentagon Joint Staff for Intelligence, and then to Moscow as Assistant Army Attaché, and then to Ukraine as Army Attaché. The Pentagon was a crazy time in the Joint Intelligence Staff. Warsaw Pact disintegrated, the Soviet Union split apart, we had the Panama Canal invasion, we had the Yugoslav War, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, a few other crises rolled in between all of that. I could go on and on. I just wanted to share a couple personal highlights from that time. When the Warsaw Pact came apart, the intelligence community didn't really know what to do with it because all the East European countries were like, oh, that's the Warsaw Pact. And suddenly we had to convince everyone who was making decisions that you can't treat them all as one lump group. You have to treat them as an individual country because they are all different. Poland, as soon as they could, started agitating or started pushing to come closer to the United States. I was involved in some of that. And I was fortunate to be able to go on one of the very first, maybe it was the first exchange where US military went to Poland. It was a group of historians. They figured that was a safe topic for discussion of history at that point. We were just getting to know each other. And here we are laying the wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. The Poles couldn't do enough. We had many toasts to both countries, a lot of late night discussions. They were showing us off. The gentleman to my right, I was in the back row. He yanked me to the front because he wanted me to be in the front. It was a very moving moment for me after all those years. The other nice thing that happened, highlight that happened, I got promoted to lieutenant colonel. My parents, this was the only time my parents could actually come to one of my promotions. They pinned me. And honestly, I thought at this point, okay, this is it. I'm not going any further. I'm going to retire in 2 years, which I was going to reach the 20-year mark, and that would be it. However, I got a dream assignment to be an assistant army attaché in Moscow. So I was the first woman attaché, and it was a post-Cold War environment because now you just had Russia and all these other republics that had turned into countries. It was a little easier to work there in that, for example, we as attachés didn't have to ask permission to go visit other parts of Russia, but we had to tell them we were going, so we were being followed a lot. There was still a lot of distrust, and the Russians, by and large, were not exactly, they did not approach our cooperation with open arms. There was a lot of resistance still on their part. But we did what we could. I viewed this time as an opportunity to begin to understand each other. It was a time of hope. Unfortunately, that too has not panned out. This happened about a few months after I got to Moscow. Yeltsin and his parliament had a little disagreement. That's the parliament building. After shots were fired, Marine attaché and I were sent out to go see what was happening in Moscow. That's one of the street scenes that we picked up on. I was also there for the 50th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War, which is what the Soviet Union, Russia calls World War II. It was a huge event. President Clinton was there, many, many dignitaries, lots of events going on. My role in all of this was coordinating veterans events. We had a contingent of about 15 with the American Legion come. Veterans from every country that participated in the war came, to include Germany. On the left, you see there were all kinds of events all over the place. Everyone who had served pretty much was walking around in their uniforms. These are two Russian veterans with their medals and all. One of my jobs was to coordinate with the Moscow National the Veterans Organization in Russia. And I worked with the gentleman that's standing to my right. He was the deputy. The fellow to my left is his boss. Then they were the Moscow Veterans Group. When I brought the invitations, this is a picture taken at Ambassador Pickering did a reception at Spaso House at his residence and invited a whole bunch of veterans. When I took the invitations to them, the deputy said, "Oh, my boss isn't going to come. He hates Americans." Said, and nevertheless, here's his invitation. It's his choice. He's getting the invitation. A few weeks after this, I got a bunch of photos that had been taken that evening, and I went to give them some. The deputy says, "I got to tell you, when we got back, my boss told me what a waste these last 50 years have been." And that just goes to show you the person-to-person contact, not necessarily at the highest levels, but at usins, regular people, because that changed 50 years of his dislike, to put it mildly, of Americans. And to the right is Polish veterans. They insisted on a photo with me. And one other thing I wanted to say about all the veterans that I talked to during these few days is that they all gave the same message, and that was their hope that their sacrifices would mean that their grandchildren wouldn't have to have the same sacrifices. Another hope unfulfilled in some parts of the world, unfortunately. Another thing I got to do, is everyone familiar with Katyn?
Yes.
Anyone not familiar with Katyn? Well, briefly, about 22,000 Polish officers and intelligentsia, Polish intelligentsia, were basically massacred in Katyn and a few other locations. Initially, the site was discovered by it was first blamed on the Germans. The Soviets blamed it on the Germans. But years later, it came to be proven that it was really Soviet forces that did the massacring. And I got to go to Katyn when the ground was being consecrated in preparation for creating a memorial cemetery there. Our defense attaché, knowing I was Polish, he got an invitation. He said, "Why don't you go?" It was very, very moving. There were all kinds of dignitaries that came. This is a photo I took. I'm not a great photographer, but there's Wałęsa as one example. It was a very moving time, and those are other attachés that were with me. The Polish attaché was a little upfront and personal there, but we did know each other. Excuse me. One more story about this is that my parents happened to be in Poland at this time, and they were watching TV. They were at a spa. They were watching TV in a room of other people. Polish TV was showing this when I guess the camera spanned and I appeared on the TV. My dad and mom went ballistic. "What is our daughter?" I am to this day very happy I was able to give them that joy. Okay. I did get promoted in Moscow to colonel, much to my surprise, maybe a whole bunch of other people's surprise. I show this just to say that, you know the saying, "When in Rome"? All right. So I had just gotten promoted. The DCM and our defense attaché there, they promoted me. And of course, being in Moscow, we had to have a toast. That's not the usual protocol for promotions, that you get pinned and then you have some vodka, but we did that. And then a good time was had by all afterwards. And yes, Mom and Dad visited in Russia, and also they came to visit me in Ukraine. The only place no one ever visited me was Kansas. I wonder why. So from there, I went to Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainians were welcoming of any and all. I mean, there were some little exceptions. We call them dinosaurs that were still left in the Cold War. But by and large, the Ukrainians were very welcoming of exchanges, of learning, of seeing how we do things. And it was a whole different atmosphere in Ukraine. We had a lot of military bilateral exchanges. That was one of my jobs, to arrange those, bringing Ukrainians to the United States, and we had all kinds of our troops coming to Ukraine. A busy time. The other main part of my job was to organize peacekeeping exercises in Yavoriv training area, which is north of Lviv. It got bombed in the most recent war. We did a whole series of peacekeeping exercises. The Ukrainians really wanted to learn how to do that. And so we did 3 of them. The first was the United States and Ukraine, the second was Warsaw Pact countries and Ukraine, and the third was a full-level NATO exercise with all NATO countries participating. I must say that the third peacekeeping, both the lead-up and everything to it, was a diplomatic challenge for me, because nothing against Greek people, but the Greeks were put in charge. And if the Greeks didn't come to me one day complaining about what the Ukrainians were doing, the Ukrainians were coming to me complaining about what the Greeks were doing. They came in a little heavy-handed, assuming that the Ukrainians didn't know very much about that, but they had already done a whole bunch of exercises. Nevertheless, it happened, everything went well. We had all kinds of dignitaries come for that. Of course, we had to start with a parade, and I just selected 3 shots: Polish flag, Ukrainian flag, and our United States flag. This is a picture of me and the guys at the Yavoriv Training Center. The gentleman to my right was the general I dealt with a lot on many issues, to include paying to have the site improved to our standards. One funny story: we brought them to the United States to one of our bases. They stayed in the BOQ. We have televisions in every BOQ. When I got back there, they, on their list of things that needed to be done and paid for, was TVs in every room of officers' quarters. And I went, no, guys, I'm sorry. I can't approve that. I was approving the budget. I said, no, I don't want to go to jail. I can't be doing that. And we always, these are some of the ladies that were there, just a picture of me and the ladies who did a lot of the cooking and the cleaning there. Other duties, we had an attaché association. I was the vice president. Every year we threw an annual attaché ball. That's the picture. The guy in the middle is the chief of the joint staff of the Ukrainian forces. And down on the bottom is me talking to the chief of the Ukrainian airborne forces. He was a very interesting person. We talked, of course, business, but we had so many philosophical discussions with him. He was a very deep person. And I don't know what the heck we're talking about there, but we were talking. And this is the team. You have, as an attaché, many entertaining responsibilities. This is Sveta and Anton. We're all a little younger there. Sveta did a lot of house cleaning and some cooking for me. Anton did all kinds of things for me. I couldn't have done it without them. They are still in Ukraine. Sveta married and built a house outside of Kyiv. I visited in 2018 and got to reconnect. I'm still in touch. Sveta had a house built outside of Kyiv. They left for a while because the house next to them got bombed. Their house lost all their windows. Anton became a lawyer. He is still practicing in Kyiv. They're doing a lot by Zoom, and many a day when they can't continue because nowadays the electricity is out, so it's very, very difficult. But they're keeping up good spirits. Sveta and her husband are now working for, I forget the name of the organization, delivering all kinds of goods into Ukraine. And hopefully they'll have life back to normal. The people in Ukraine, I know in Kyiv, I'm told, are trying to have some sense of normalcy despite everything, so many things are still continuing as best they can. All right, so then I retired. I really grew to love Ukraine and its people while I was there. Who knew that I would end up in Jaffrey? Who knew that I would become, as Joe said, an interfaith minister and a chaplain? None of that was in the plan. I didn't have time to plan my retirement. So I show this picture of a mandala because I want to share a funny story. I went to Hartford Seminary. I kind of stumbled into that. And the first course I attended was the Women's Leadership Institute. I figured I knew enough about leadership, but they were talking about feminist spirituality, so I wanted to learn about that. And the very first class that I went to, I stopped dead in my tracks at the threshold of the classroom, where a mandala was on the floor, candles, other artifacts. I had recently retired. I was not a touchy-feely person. But I said, no, you're going to do this, you're going to go in. And so I did. And I'm very, very grateful for that experience. I ended up getting a degree in spirituality, and then going a few years later to Tree of Life Interfaith Temple and got ordained there as an interfaith minister. So it has been a gift. How I got to Jaffrey, trying to make this short, several years before, sort of in the early 80s, George, correct me if I'm wrong, Mom and Dad bought 2 plots of land somewhere around Crestview, it was the middle of the woods then. George calls me one day and says, hey, Mom and Dad are buying this land in Jaffrey. I said, what the heck is Jaffrey? What's New Hampshire? I said, okay. You want to buy the lot next to them? I said, yeah, sure. So we did, and we held on to it for a number of years. And then Mom put her foot down and prevailed, because she told my dad, you want to retire there? I'll come visit you. So we ended up, selling the land. And then when I retired, a friend and I went camping across the States in Canada, and we ended up in Greenfield on my way to my brothers in Hampstead at the time, brothers and Sandy. And I got a map, and I went, Jaffrey, we were in Greenfield. I said, well, this is where Jaffrey was. No kidding. So one thing led to another. I had not planned anything for my retirement. I had a townhouse in Washington, D.C. I knew I couldn't go back to that rat race. And I could have, but I didn't want to. So I started looking around. Long story short, I ended up renting in Jaffrey and then having a house built where I've been living for over 20 years on Ingalls Road. And I am very, very grateful for having landed here. So as a chaplain, I worked roughly 10 years for hospice at HCS. I worked at a nursing home down in Massachusetts. I worked, and I volunteered at a few nursing homes around here and at a hospital down in Massachusetts for a number of years. And I want to share some lessons. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I want to share some lessons from my times as a chaplain. Blessings work both ways. If I'm a blessing, thank you, you're a blessing to me. It's very, very important to listen deeply, not put yourself into their story. It's very important, I think, to go with the flow. And we are all in this together. We are all so very, very connected. And those are lessons that I am grateful for from my time as a chaplain. And those lessons came in very handy when I went to Poland. So I went for the first time last March. And, excuse me, I just wanted to give you a little orientation. I fly into Warsaw, then I go down to Lublin. It's about a 2-hour train ride and roughly the same amount of time driving. A little southeast, closer to the border from Lublin is Zamość, another place I visit. And then more east towards the border, directly maybe from Lublin is Kaniwola, the little village I first visited. So that's where I'm focused. And when the war started, I felt it was a visceral feeling. I had to do something besides write checks. I started looking into organizations. I reached dead ends all over the place. And then there's a young man, Peter, who lived with me for about a year. He's originally from Poland. He served in the Polish army, and he actually served with our forces in Iraq. He came to visit an uncle. Anyway, that's another story. But he ended up living with me after he got out of the army. He's now doing well in England, and he's got tons of connections. So I called him. I said, Peter, you have any suggestions on what I might do if I go to Poland, how I might connect? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, my mom and sister are in the small village of Kaniwola, and they're helping refugees. They've been helping from almost day one. So why don't you go there? I'll call them, and you can stay with them and see. So I said, okay, that works. And he says, my best buddy, Pavel lives in Lublin, and he'll pick you up and take you there. I said, okay, sounds like a plan. I remain to this day very touched as word got out that I was going to go to Poland. So many people literally thrust money into my hands. I went to Poland with about $5,000-$6,000 plus money that I brought with me. And I am eternally grateful for all of you who have done that. Many small people in many small places. Okay, so this was my first trip. These are the dates. That first time that I was there, it was a bit chaotic as far as the refugees were concerned. People were trying to help all over the place, showing their support. To the left is when I walked into the Marriott, I stay at the Marriott right across from the airport to recover from the trip before I do anything else. And this says, we are in solidarity with Ukraine. I took the train that first time from Lublin to Warsaw. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, how does this thing work? Yeah, up on front of this engine were Polish and Ukrainian flags. Every engine that came through that station had Polish and Ukrainian flags on it. This is a couple pictures from Kaniwola. This is a little a village of about 1,000 people out in the lake region. Yeah, kind of, hey, there's another circle. They're a lake region, and we're a lake region. There's a little store that they have there, and this to the right is the building where they put up about 40 women and children, refugees from Ukraine. They were already there when I arrived. So when I got there, I stayed with Peter's mom, Vasha, slept on her couch. It was a very comfortable couch. They have small apartments there. And I was introduced to some of the women who were refugees there, started talking to them, got to know what their needs were, and started helping with the funds that I had received. I show this picture because when I left Kaniwola the first time, coming out of the apartment building where I was staying, there was this beautiful rainbow. You can take it for what you want. You can interpret it for what you want, but I really was moved by this rainbow appearing. From there, I went to Lublin, and these are just a couple photos. This is their town hall. Again, a big, huge sign, or town hall, it's a city, so a city hall. We are in solidarity, Lublin is in solidarity with Ukraine. This is in their pedestrian zone, their pedestrian area. The sign to the right says, do you need help, and gives you information on where to find it. And not to mention, they'll scan things now. They're very up to date on that. To the left is the Rosmarin restaurant. Some of you may know that history. I was walking through their pedestrian area. It's very worth visiting. And saw this sign on the bottom there, here. And that basically said, we support Ukrainians and we offer free lunches for Ukrainians. So I was intrigued because I was looking for places to support. So I walked in there and one of the owners was there. We got to talking. I left him some money. I must have told someone back home that this had happened, because next thing I know, Susan and Ken Campbell got in the picture. And they were planning the annual dinner, correct me if I'm wrong out there, annual dinner for the JCVIS, and created a fundraiser and collected, I believe it was close to around $1,500, which I was able the day before I left to take back to the two owners. They were stunned, very, very grateful, and ended up with some of that money it was coming up Orthodox Easter, so they did a special meal for the Ukrainian refugees for Orthodox Easter with that money. And my friend and neighbor Karen was able to take the money, put it into my account that I had here, so I was able to draw that. Anyway, so that's how it flowed. It was a whole series of connections. One person told me, I went to check it out. Sometimes it panned out, sometimes it didn't. It was just sort of following a trail of one connection to another. I thought I would go there, maybe help interpret or serve food. I was really surprised by ending up coordinating all of this support effort. Oops, wrong one. Zamość, just again, word of mouth. Someone told me about a woman, Stefania, and her husband, who from day one were helping refugees. They had set up a not-for-profit called La Pigua. They had refugees in their home. Ultimately, they cooperated with the woman who ran the wedding venue in Zamość. And they put up Ukrainian refugees in the wedding venue. That just says it's a point for we can help here. The wedding venue had rooms upstairs, which worked out ideally, and downstairs in the huge celebration hall, they had corners, here's clothing, here's toys for children, and so on and so forth. So that was Zamość. Went back to Kanivola. We ended up getting a bunch of stuff to make their lives a little bit better. We got a basketball hoop and a basketball even for the kids. We got them a number of things to help ease their life there. To the left this was, I think, after I left. I got this picture from Marcin and his wife Magda. Ah, yes, Marcin and Magda. Marcin is my driver and team member in Poland, in Lublin. We'll see a picture later. He's a wonderful guy, and he and Magda, while I'm gone, are able to do things there. How I found, quote unquote, Marcin, I took Pavel and his wife out to dinner to thank him for driving me around, and I had realized by then it would have been very helpful to have some dedicated transportation. I didn't want to rent a car and try to figure out the roads all by myself. And at that dinner, totally unsolicited, Pavel goes, well, I have a brother-in-law, his wife is his sister, I have a brother-in-law who's a taxi driver, and he'd be really happy to drive you around. I said, you have got to be kidding me. So the next day we met, and ever since then he's been helping. How he's been helping? Well, before I left Poland, with Pavel's help, I set up a Polish bank account with a with a dollar account, and also a zloty account. We can transfer money from here to there in dollars. I can go online and switch that into zloty. Marcin, whom I trust 100%, 150%, and Pavel have ATM cards, and they can draw zloty from ATM machines as things come up. They can continue doing things in Poland when I'm not there. So after I left that first time, Marcin, and just when spring was breaking out, Marcin and Magda and their dog, Marlon, yes, after Marlon Brando. Yes, after Marlon Brando. They went back there, and just the kids. Some of the mothers said, this is the first time that the kids really were able to just have a blast, and they did that day when they brought Marlon. That's just what they do. Okay. Before I left the first time, we took the Ukrainians food shopping, because up to that point they were getting a lot of staples, packaged food, some food for a restaurant, but they were really longing for fresh fruit and vegetables, primarily, they said, for their children. So we took them to the store. This is the result on the left. And Marcin continued doing that as long as they were there. About every month or so, he took them shopping using the ATM card after I left. To the right is clothing that he was able to get for them. The Ukrainians all arrived with winter clothing. Suddenly spring is here. He coordinated with the ladies and got summer clothing for everybody from secondhand stores. That was a lot of effort. There's no overhead in this operation other than paying Marcin for his fuel, because he's there. He works as a cab driver. This is Marcin and Magda and Marlon. This is, I think, during my last visit, I took this picture. Marcin, we joked that he could be my bodyguard. He's got tattoos all over. He's got a heart of gold. He was driving from the beginning. Ukrainians, if they arrived in Lublin with maybe an address scratched on a piece of paper, he drove them there without charging them. That's just what he does. One funny story, I was driving with him. we were stuck in traffic, I think it was Lublin, and suddenly he realized he needed to take an exit. So he's like, kind of cut someone off, this fellow next to us. He cut him off, and I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I look over, and this guy is mad. And he rolls down his window, and Martin rolls down his window, and I'm watching all of this, and you could see the guy's mad, ready to explode. He takes one look at Martin, and he goes, okay. And Martin, he was apologetic. He said, oh, I'm so sorry, but yeah, okay, it's okay. So anyway, that's them. So this is the system that we're working in. And when I came back the first time, the first church in Jaffrey, Steve Miller, who's the pastor there, First Church was very wanting to support. And so what we've done, for those of you who may not know, is set up a separate account from all other accounts that the church may have, where any donations are deposited into that account, and that's what we then do and send over to Poland. This is my second trip. The dates I revisited, well, you can read that yourself. I need a drink of water, so why don't you go ahead and read that? I need a drink of my vodka, yes. So, Dom Matki is a place in Warsaw that focuses on women with very small children. Of course, there are a few older children if you have multiple children. They've had a few births, as a matter of fact, since the refugees arrived there. Edison School is a private school in Warsaw, which we were supporting in the interim. All of this is someone knew that I was there, said, hey, can you check this out? It just all happened. I met with Natalia. That was another fair that Marcin had picked up in the interim. She has 3 children. We did a lot to help her while she was in Poland with the 3 kids. I actually interviewed her. She was willing for an interview. I wrote her story, her life story, in one of the Ledger transcript articles that I did. She has since returned to Ukraine. She wanted to return. We kept in touch, but we've unfortunately lost contact with her. And then I've had meetings from the first trip throughout with a man called Lukasz. He goes into Ukraine on a regular basis, doing all kinds of things, helping women who've been raped, bringing supplies in. He's got all kinds of connections within Ukraine. This is just a picture, Carnivala farewell. When I went back the second time, the Ukrainians had been told they were going to need to move out of the building because the community needed it to house summer vacationers. That's what they do there. Most of them went back, with a few exceptions. I met this time with some that were still there. There were a few more that were still there. That's a ping pong table we also bought. And one of my missions in going back was to bring messages from First Church in Jaffrey. On the right you see what I brought back. People at First Church wrote messages to the Ukrainians there in Carnivala. I translated everything for the people, and it was also a very moving thing. I think it was the lady on the left. There were tears in their eyes, and she said, it's very important to have food for the soul as well as food for the body. So it was a very, very moving, they much appreciated the messages that had been sent. This is just a couple pictures of Dom Matki in Warsaw. It's on a quiet road, dirt road, a big fence all around it. This is the Edison School that we supported. They did a wonderful job. It's a private school. They did a wonderful job setting things up for the Ukrainians. They also had to ask them to move shortly after I visited because they needed that space back for the next school year, but they took pains to find everyone a place to live if they were going to be staying. How we helped them, the Ukrainian children who attended the school, especially the older kids, I think there were about 14 Ukrainian kids. At the end of the school year, those kids in that age group get to go to some kind of camp, end of school camp up towards the ocean, at the ocean. And they didn't have enough money to send the Ukrainian children. They didn't want them to be left behind, feel They were different. So we were able to support them and send all the Ukrainian kids. The mothers were very thankful. Okay, did I go? Yes, I did. All right, so this is my third visit, more recent. Again, I went back to Dom Matki. They did, in the interim, they did a lot of housekeeping, a lot of reorganizing, regrouping. The brackets opened the gates for us when Marcin and I arrived. Before I left for Poland and they had a trip to Poland, they said they had some free time. They asked if there was a place that they might volunteer, so connected them with that. Dom Matki, they did a lot of good over there while they were there, but we arrived, and who opens the door for Marcin and me? It's Pauline and Steve. That was kind of cool. So I also met with Lukasz again. Liliowa 5 is another place we're now supporting. Learned of this from Connection in Zamość, went to check it out. Actually, I asked Marcin to go check it out because I was here at the time. He connected with Victoria and started helping them also buying things that they needed. Initially, they needed a whole bunch of diapers. This is a place in Lublin, also about 30 to 40 people. There are about 7, I think it is, autistic children, 1 blind boy there. And so we started helping them once Marcin checked it out and said, yes, let's help them. So I went there and met with, this time on my trip, I met with Victoria, who herself is a Ukrainian, and she feels it's her mission to stay there and help these people who are there. She speaks Polish, which is very helpful, and part-time she works at, anyone want to guess? McDonald's. Bingo! She works part-time at McDonald's. Lovely young lady. All right, so, oh, wait a minute, can I go back? Yeah. So I revisited Zamość and their distribution center, and at the end, I'll talk about this. There was a concert that I was very, very lucky to attend. This is Liliowa 5. This is what's hanging when you walk in. It's a big house by Polish standards. Even by our standards, it's a big house. The story there is the Polish woman who owns it. When the refugee crisis happened, she moved out, turned the whole house into a residence for Ukrainians. There at the early stages were over 100 Ukrainians who were staying there. Right now, as I said, I can't remember exactly, I think there are between 30 and 40 people who are staying there. She herself is still living in some other apartment, and the house is still available for Ukrainians. This is the distribution point in Zamość, run by a Pani Bożenka, and you do not want to cross Pani Bożenka. She is about this tall, ball of fire, runs that place with the help of some Ukrainian women. They have anything from clothing to cleaning supplies to food to aspirin, things like of that nature, daily needs things. A funny story there. Pani Bożenka said they don't turn anything away. Shortly before we got there, they had received a whole bunch of cases of pesto. Pesto is not in the daily diet usually of Polish and Ukrainian cuisine, but she said, we don't turn anything away, but would you mind taking some of this off our hands? So we loaded up the car before we left with a whole bunch of cases of pesto and took it to Liliowa 5 the next day or whenever. And they said, we'll use it, no problem. So we were able to share the pesto with them. Okay, the concert. So I wasn't supposed to be at this concert. This is another one of those things that wasn't planned. I was actually supposed to be in Warsaw waiting for my very early morning flight back to the States. However, Delta canceled my return flight about a week before I was due to go to Poland. And there's another story there, but ultimately I ended up coming back, getting a flight a day later. So I was still in Lublin when this concert happened. And Pavel, I won't go into all the details, but by another fluke, was someplace where there was a guy that was offering tickets to this concert, which took place at one of the Lublin's universities. It's known for its universities, in an auditorium in Lublin. So he asked if I wanted to go, and I said, well, yes, absolutely, I would love to go. This was the opening scene. Now, this concert was put on by Ukrainian refugees to thank their Lublin hosts for doing what they were doing for them. This is a group of children. Now, the concert included lots of music, anywhere from rock, hard rock, to folk songs, to various musical instruments, to some poetry, all kinds of music. And this group of children, unfortunately we can't play this for you today, but they sang a Polish folk song. It might also be a Ukrainian one, but I grew up with this folk song, so I knew it. And they went ahead and sang it. It was touching. There was not a dry, I don't think, there was a dry eye in the audience. It was mostly Ukrainians and Poles. I might have been the only American, I don't know. But everyone, it was such a moving thing, which is why I'm so grateful that I was able to attend. Thank you, Delta, for canceling. Thank you, Delta, for canceling my flight. So intermingled with the music of various kinds, really some talented individuals, some amateurs, but really there were some talented artists performing. But there were also stories being told, and I'd like to share two stories. One, I think it's this young lady who told the story. And they had all kinds of slides up there too. Her story was, she had to leave really, really quickly because they were bombing. She grabbed her backpack, she said, stuffed it with whatever, and left. And then her journey led her to Lublin. And she said that along the way of her journey, she realized that it's not important what you have in terms of goods. It's important what you have inside. And that home is where your heart is. Now, a young lady came to that conclusion. It's a good lesson, I think, for all of us. The other story is a mother told about her, and she had a teenage daughter, and they too had to leave in a hurry. And the mother's yelling at the daughter, grab what, just one or two things, and let's go. And the daughter grabbed her violin, and she played that violin that evening. So I'm almost done. So when before I started preparing for this, I wasn't sure how the heck I was going to talk this long. But once I started, I said, oh my God, they're going to pull me away with one of those hooks. I think this was the last song, but it was towards the end. It's a song, actually the title of the song is "Oh Strange Is This World." It was sung, it was a big hit in Poland in the 1970s, sung by Czesław Niemann. And when you can you all read the words? Yeah. Okay, you don't need to hear me drone on then, okay. So when you consider these words, they were sung, they were written in the 1970s in the depths of the communist era. There's another layer here of meaning of this song. I like to just read the last verse. But most people are of good will. I, thanks to them, believe that this world should never, never die. And now the time has come, the final time, for hatred to destroy itself. Now, when a woman with a marvelous voice started singing the song, the audience went crazy. I, of course, did have no idea what the song signified, or what it meant. So I went, what? And I went with Pavel and his wife, and then Marcin didn't go, but Magda did. I guess they only got 4 tickets. the crowd went absolutely wild. It was a very, very moving moment. And I go back to what I started saying in the beginning, in that there are many, many people of goodwill, both in Poland and all over the place, and there needs to be a focus on these people of goodwill, to listen to their stories, to show that there is another way than what is going on right now in Ukraine. So whom are we supporting now? We continue to support through the First Church Fund. I didn't want to continue getting inundated with money as I was going to Poland, so this fund has been very, very helpful in managing what we are supporting. We're supporting Dom Matki in Warsaw. Most recently, and Janet Grant is instrumental in this as the treasurer of the church. And so is TD Bank, Brandon. They don't charge us for the international transfer fees. He helps make all of this happen. Most recently, we sent, I think it was $1,000 to Dom Matki, and got an email back from the wonderful gal there, Anna. She's a very young Polish woman. She runs the day-to-day operations there. They are not-for-profit. She has a little son that when we met with her this last time that we visited, she told us what they're doing, about the births coming up. She's very, very involved. And she's also made a point to say that one of their missions is for those Ukrainians who want to stay in Poland, they want to help them get on their own 2 feet. And she told me a couple stories where they've had some success in that. So Anna, she wrote me an email and said, your timing couldn't have been better. Our basement was just flooded. We lost a bunch of stuff that we had stored there, and we need to make repairs. With Liliowa 5 in Lublin, we also support them. Really, Marcin does that. He still goes shopping, coordinates with Victoria, makes a list of what they need, uses the magical ATM card and goes ahead and delivers. So he does a lot of legwork for our team effort. Do I have time? I don't know where I am. I don't want to keep you all, but some of you got handouts. I don't think we had enough for everybody that's here. It does list at the end if you are, well, anyway, but it does tell the story of Daniil, the 2-year-old blind boy, and I want to give Dr. Dimitri Tarasevich a round of applause, because when I came back after meeting, the mother wanted help for the boy. Talked to him. He contacted one of his colleagues, who contacted someone else, who contacted someone else, who knew someone in Krakow. I'm now writing to the doctor in Krakow, sending him the documents the mother had that were translated. He sends those out to a number of specialists within Poland. Unfortunately, they all came back saying that there's nothing medically that can be done for the boy. He's got some nerve that's undeveloped. However, this doctor didn't stop there. He contacted a school for blind children in Lublin, full circle. So I started in Lublin, came back here, path, well, it was a circle, all right, so then we'll back to Poland and then back up to Lublin. He's supposed to start school like in the next day or so there. So, all right, Zamość, Lapigua we're supporting there. We send via PayPal. And Lukasz, the most recent support that we gave him, he bought a whole bunch of winter clothing and took that into Ukraine. So we've been doing that. That's it. I'm heading back at the end of this month for probably also a couple of weeks. I will see what's happening, and I'll just be kind of led around.
I'm not sure there's a dry eye in this place. Do we have people online, Ed?
Yes, we had.
All right, well, to those of you who are participating remotely, if you have a question or a comment, please use the chat line. And yes, would you, just a second. Let me, Ed, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. Hi, neighbor.
It's fine, it's on.
Okay, is this hot? Okay. That's okay. Ilona, I mean, we've known each other for quite a while. We live three doors down. The questions that come to me, first of all, incredibly, and I'm sure I speak for others, moved by the whole story. The whole story needed to be told, like you said, coming full circle. Two things. One, this is a small community. We're 60, 70 people here today, and you're one person carrying this water. There are many other towns in the Monadnock region, to say nothing about our country. I want you to comment, and then I'll give you a second question, about what's being done nationwide and within the region.
I can't begin to elaborate on all of that. I mean, I know of, like I said in the beginning, there are many other people Goodwill doing many other things. I know in Keene, for example, there's a mother and daughter who've been sponsored from Ukraine. A family sponsored them. They're in Keene right now. I think the Lions Club is doing something. There are a number of efforts going on in the Monadnock region. I know there's someone in Harrisville who is doing that. There's a person in Wilton. I hope to connect with these two people shortly.
Oh, good.
They've also engaged, I'm not exactly sure how, there have been people who've been sponsored. Within New Hampshire, I know there's organizations that are doing that. So yes, that's why I say many small people in many small places, and I'm just one of those small people.
And the second question is the trend toward, both politically and
Is the what? I'm sorry.
The trend
Oh.
toward less support for Ukraine, both politically and perhaps the war weariness, where we as individuals are not supporting them. And I'd love to have your comments.
Well,
Thank you.
as I think my slides showed, the first visit was chaotic. The second, things had stabilized. And the third, the overall overarching message was that support was dwindling within Poland. A number of organizations had pulled out of Poland. The need was still there. And everyone told me this. Wherever I visited, they said that, we're not getting the support that we did initially when the influx came into Poland. And they're trying to figure it out. How can we continue supporting for those who don't go back, those who want to stay? It's not easy. And the Polish people themselves have, higher inflation than we do. Gasoline, I think for them a gallon, if I reckon, if my arithmetic is good, not my strong point, Francie can probably correct me. I think it's like $8 a gallon. They pay by the liter. So they have their own struggles and issues, but guys like Marcin and Magda, they're helping out. To be honest, I couldn't continue doing this work, I don't think, without Marcin and Magda filling in between the gaps and doing what they're doing.
My question. I don't think I need this. But anyway, my question is there any kind of national organization put together as a relief group for Ukraine, or is this all done just on a local basis like you're doing?
I'm not sure, Charlie. I think there might be. There are some large organizations still doing like refugee support, and there are support groups for Ukraine. I have a couple that I still keep getting messages from online. I wish I could remember at the moment what exactly they're called. So I think so, but there's a lot of low level from the ground up initiatives.
I think if you go to the
That's all.
It's for the folks online, so.
if you go to the State Department website, state.gov, you'll find something there that'll help you figure out groups you can go through to help in Ukraine anyway. I don't know about Poland.
Just so we don't forget, here in Jaffrey, the Paul Revere bell at the United Church down the street rings at 4:30 every Thursday, marking the beginning of that war. And last Thursday, 12 times for those 12 months.
And I do want to say that local organizations here within Jaffrey, to include United Church, have made significant contributions.
So most of the people we saw were women. I
Yes.
assume their husbands are fighting. And
Most,
s-
yeah.
And so many of them will end up having to stay in Poland. Is that true that most of their husbands are at war? And are there lots of widows in Poland at this point?
I don't have statistics, but just from anecdotal, most of the women in Kaniwola, their husbands had to stay in Ukraine. The only exceptions are fathers with, I think, 3 children. They can leave. One of the women in Kaniwola, her husband was already in Poland, but he drove TIR trucks, those big, huge trucks, all over Europe, and so he stayed there. He was able to visit every so often when he wasn't working, and he continued to work to support. Actually, that family is now in Chicago. We're in touch. So the Natalia, she didn't have a husband. She had divorced. I don't know the answer to that question. It's their choice. Like I said, the second time I went back, a lot of Ukrainians had gone back already. That's home. One of the women in Kaniwola said, my apartment was destroyed, but I'm going to go live with my mother. There's a movement back and forth. Some have gone back and then said, oh, we can't handle this, or everything's hopeless, and they left back into Poland or wherever they went. So there's a lot of cross coming and going too.
And my second question is, as opposed to the Afghan people who we opened the doors when we left Afghanistan, my understanding is that the Ukrainians need a sponsor here before they can come. Is that true?
Yes. Those that don't have families here have to have a sponsor. There's a program specifically for Ukrainians, but also lately it includes a few other countries. It's a program where they can find refuge here in the United States, and they're guaranteed they can stay at least 2 years. They can apply while they're here for asylum more long-term. There's no guarantee. They're not promised that they're going to get it. But in the interim, they can certainly apply. They have authority to work here. They can send their kids to school. They can get some level of support, but really the sponsor is the one that should be giving them the help that they need initially.
I will just say that I'm involved with the Afghan family
Yeah.
in Keene,
Yeah.
and the mother of that family was taking care of a Ukrainian mother's baby, so the Ukrainian mother could go back to work.
Wow.
And it was a gift to both.
Yeah, I imagine. Oh, that's lovely.
Yes.
That's lovely. Yeah. Mm.
Thank you all for coming for this extraordinary hour and 20 minutes.
Sorry.
I hope you will remain, chat with Ilona, enjoy the treats. I want to thank Ed Watazik for once again handling the audio video, which I think ran seamlessly. I want to say to you, Ilona, that this has been an extraordinary treat. And as I was listening to you and thinking about it, the word competence came to my mind. And I'm not going to try to define the word, but I know it when I see it. We have an example of extraordinary competence, and we're lucky you landed in Jaffrey.
I thank my lucky stars also.
Thank you again.
Thanks, Ed.
One last comment. These colors have become familiar to all of us, and we saw the Ukrainian flag in several slides. By the way, I have made a living asking stupid questions, and I asked a stupid question when I spoke with Alona a few days ago. Who's paying for you to do all this? And of course the answer was, I am. And such generosity of spirit is quite extraordinary.
Blessings
So
work.
we are not we're just here to hear stories. But today is an exception. I'm going to put this bowl in the back of the room, and, well, we have two of them. Well, Ilona asked me, or I asked her, and she said, well, what do you think? And I said, yes, it's a good idea. So if any of us wishes to contribute, it's not going to her, it's going to Ukraine. I'm going to put it at the table in the back of the room. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you so much.
Where's the table?